You are watching The World 24/7 on the NDTV network. I'm Parmeshwar Bava. Let's begin with a quick look at the headlines we're tracking at the moment. The US Supreme Court rules former presidents are entitled to some immunity from prosecution for official acts taken while in office, but have no immunity for unofficial acts. But this landmark decision means the federal election interference case against Donald Trump will return to a lower court, which will then decide how to apply this ruling. US President Biden called the Supreme Court ruling on former President Trump's immunity claims in his federal January 6 criminal case a dangerous precedent. In fact, Joe Biden said in his address that the Supreme Court decision almost certainly means that there are virtually no limits what the president can do. The United States comes out against the Arab League's decision to revoke Hezbollah's classification as a terror organization. At just 28 years old, Jordan Bardella has helped make the far-right National Rally the strongest political force in France. And now, he could become the country's youngest prime minister. European Union regulators accuse social media company Meta Platforms of breaching the bloc's new digital competition rulebook by forcing Facebook and Instagram users to choose between seeing ads or paying to avoid them. Nvidia could soon face antitrust charges in France, Reuters is reporting. And if it does, it will mark the first time a country has brought such charges against the US chip maker. While the exact nature of the potential charges are not clear, they will likely relate to its highly sought-after graphics cards. Well, our big focus, Donald Trump has immunity from criminal prosecution for some actions he took as president while fighting to subvert the 2020 election. This is what the US Supreme Court has ruled, further complicating efforts to put Trump on trial in Washington on criminal charges that he engaged in fraud to try to cling to power. The largely 6-3 decision, which divided the court along ideological lines, immediately knocked out some of the central allegations that Special Counsel Jack Smith leveled against Trump, including claims that he attempted to weaponize his Justice Department to, in a sense, concoct or amplify false claims of voter fraud. But shortly after the Supreme Court issued its decision on his claim of presidential immunity, Donald Trump took to social media to celebrate. In his words, he said, "Big win for our Constitution and democracy." While Trump did not get the sweeping protections that he and his lawyers had sought, he got more than enough to achieve his immediate objective of delaying another trial until November's election. According to reports, Trump's lawyers have asked the New York judge who presided over his hush money trial to set aside his conviction and delay his sentencing, scheduled for later this month. But US President Joe Biden ripped the Supreme Court's decision on presidential immunity and called the Supreme Court ruling on Trump's immunity claims a dangerous precedent. Biden said in his address that the Supreme Court decision almost certainly means that there are virtually no limits what the president can do. Biden blamed Trump for the January 6, 2021 attack on the US Capitol and actually said the American people deserve to have an answer in the courts about what happened then before they vote in November's election.
Today's 6-3 vote, split along ideological lines, decided that presidents of the United States have limited immunity from criminal prosecution. In this particular case, what they're saying is that presidents do have total immunity, essentially, from official acts, but they do not necessarily have immunity from unofficial acts.
But what precedent does the Supreme Court ruling set for future cases concerning US presidents, whether future or former?
Well, this is certainly a historical ruling. We haven't had a precedent like this before. It will affect presidents presumably forever, unless the Supreme Court changes its ruling in future. What they're doing for now is kicking it back to the lower courts from where this case came. This involves immunity for Donald Trump for acts that he committed after the votes were cast in the 2020 presidential election. He didn't like the outcome. He lost, and he took actions essentially trying to overturn the results of that election. And a special counsel has brought charges against him for that. This case now certainly being kicked back to the lower courts will delay that. So we're unlikely to see a verdict in that before this November's election. And the special prosecutor, Jack Smith, is probably going to have to go back to the courts and change his charging documents. And what I've read of the decision so far is that it's going to make it a lot more difficult for him to take official actions and try to turn them into prosecutions for what would be deemed unofficial acts. So much more challenging for the prosecution and much better for Donald Trump's defense lawyers in pushing back against this.
Right. But Steve, what's next for Trump and his legal counsel? If a trial before Election Day seemed difficult before the immunity ruling, is it all but impossible now?
Well, Trump is painting this, as I said, as a total victory that basically gives him the right now to say and do whatever he wants on the campaign trail. Well, that's not going to be the case. But what he's saying is that he's basically free now between now and the election. Again, that's not true. There's another case in which he faces sentencing, the so-called hush money trial, where he was convicted on several dozen criminal fraud counts. The sentencing for that is coming up, I think, on the 11th or so, later this month. So that will be just days before the Republican National Convention. And he could conceivably be sentenced to prison, although we don't think that's going to happen as a first-time offender. But there could be restrictions placed on him that could affect his campaigning.
But Steve, this particular ruling, the Supreme Court has clearly distinguished between official and unofficial acts in its ruling. In your understanding, how does this distinction play into prior cases of retention of classified documents by both presidents, Trump and Biden?
Well, it's going to be for these lower courts now to decide what actions are official and unofficial. So, and then we'll probably have an appeal on these different charges in this case or any future case come back up to the Supreme Court for consideration. But one of the examples that's been given is could a president now carry out an assassination against a foreign leader and have absolute immunity because that's now determined to be an official act? Your imagination could run wild with different things that you think a leader of a country could do if he knew that he was absolved of facing any prosecution for that in the future.
Well, most crucially for the special counsel, Jack Smith, his prosecutors will not be able to introduce as evidence any acts deemed to be official, even as contextual information for jurors to show Trump's intent. But thanks, Steve, for joining us from Washington. Meanwhile, amid fears of the Israel-Hamas war spilling over into neighboring Lebanon, the Arab League has revoked the terrorist designation of Hezbollah. Hezbollah, as you know, is a Lebanon-based and Iran-backed terrorist organization that controls vast swaths of territories in the country and holds great political sway as well.
But is that they feel...
And there's just 2 days to go until the UK's general election campaign draws to a close and the fate of Britain's leading politicians passes to the voters. But what's happening in the UK at the moment? Well, Rishi Sunak believes he will still be Prime Minister by the end of the week. Opinion polls, though, suggest that Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's Conservative Party will be punished for failing to deliver on promises that have been made during the last 14 years in power. The Labour Party, meanwhile, which leans to the left, is far ahead in most opinion polls after focusing its campaign on a single word, change. But as the campaigns draw to a close, take a look at the key issues this poll season in the United Kingdom. The UK is set to go to elections this Thursday, with polls showing that the Labour Party is expected to end 14 consecutive years of Conservative rule. But on the other hand, Keir Starmer has a mountain of challenges to climb if he forms the new government. The UK has gone through a series of difficulties since last going to polls in 2019, following the repercussions of the COVID-19 pandemic and the Russia-Ukraine war. The nation now faces a cost of living crisis, struggling public services, and the highest NHS waiting times to date. The latest British Social Attitudes report published by the National Centre for Social Research reveals an overall dissatisfaction with the nation's recent political and social climate that has ultimately led to an overall decline in trust in the government. And perhaps the largest challenge to overcome for the winners of the UK election. Although spending on the National Health Service is significantly higher than it was before the pandemic, 52% are unsatisfied with the NHS, which is twice as much as the 25% in 2019. Immigration also continues to be a critical challenge for the new government, as net migration hit 768,000 last year, although the Conservatives promised to reduce immigration. Economic concerns and the rising cost of living further add to this hurdle, as high immigration levels have shifted public sentiment, with only 40% now viewing migrants as beneficial to the British economy.
Now is the moment for Britain to choose its future, to decide whether we want to build.
As the UK heads to elections, it is clear that the incoming leadership will have its task cut out to restore the public's trust and confidence in the government. With Samia Afsar, Parmeshwar Bava for NDTV. Well, the UK general election may be 2 days away, but for some Tory candidates, it's merely the staging pose for the competition they are really focused on, which is their party leadership contest. But joining us on the broadcast, campaign head for Conservative Friends of India, Sai Karthik Madhabhushi. Thanks so much for making time for us. Most polls currently show Conservatives trailing in the upcoming elections. How does the party view this? Rishi Sunak also stated that only Conservatives can form the strong opposition to Labour.
We have gone through some unprecedented times. We've faced a pandemic in COVID, and we've had a war in Ukraine, which we did not expect. And coming from that perspective, I would say that Rishi and the Conservative government have done a brilliant job of bringing down inflation from 11.1% to 2.3% this quarter. And I would say that, yes, times are tough and people are tired, but I would say that having a clear plan, a bold action, and sticking to the plan will ensure a secure future for Britain.
Right, picking up on the economy, the Conservative Party aims to reduce borrowing and debt. At the same time, the Sunak administration aims to spend over, if I'm not mistaken, £300 million on the Rwanda scheme. How is this likely to impact the economy at a time growth is stagnant?
Growth is not stagnant. We have to be pragmatic in what we compare ourselves against. Amongst the G7 countries, we have 0.6% of growth, which for a country like the UK is significant and very good. This has only been possible because of Rishi's amazing plan of bringing down inflation. So now we're able to cut taxes and from national insurance contributions from 12% to 8% and give a further saving of £900 for the average worker in this country. And because of this, we've been able to stimulate growth and get the country back on track. Now, coming to your specific question about the Rwanda scheme, I don't know if you know, we spend nearly $3 billion in tackling illegal migration. And the UK government spends nearly £6 million a day on housing illegal immigrants. When you take this into context, 300 million does not seem much. But more than the money aspect of it, I think the Rwanda scheme is there as a deterrent to prevent illegal migration.
But you know, many argue that the betting scandal is now worse for the Tories than Rishi's D-Day blunder. What would you say? How badly has this scandal impacted the Conservative Party this election?
It is extremely disappointing that certain individuals decided to act on their own and do that. I cannot comment much on this further because this matter has been referred to the police and there's an independent investigation ongoing within the Conservative Party. And I'm sure once the results of those findings come to light, the appropriate measures will be taken against those individuals. But I have to admit, it is disappointing that something like this has happened. Yeah.
Also, Sai Karthik, you know, research indicates that half of the Conservative Party members are over 60. They're male and they're white. Does being a person of Indian origin help you in any way in connecting better with your constituents? Sizable chunks, we are well aware, are from the Indian community. Does this help your case?
So the Conservative Party has always been very diverse and very welcoming to the Indian community. We have over 4,000 members who are the Conservative Friends of India. I myself, I've been a member of the Conservative Friends of India for a long time. And all I would say is, having lived in Brent, which is one of the most diverse boroughs in the country, and significant amount of the population here is from an Asian background, predominantly from India. And it is much more comfortable to have these conversations on the doorstep when you're campaigning, when you try and get your message across. So being a person of Indian origin always helps in campaigning in diverse areas like London and Leicester and other parts of the country.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on The World 24/7. Turning our attention now to France, to the man who could be the next prime minister there. Marine Le Pen is the name that springs to any mind at any mention of France's hard-right National Rally Party. But it's actually her close aide, Jordan Bardella, who could be thrust into one of the most powerful roles in France after a snap election. Bardella has risen up the ranks of the Eurosceptic and anti-immigration National Rally to become its president in 2022, with his youth, his looks, and social media savviness helping to attract younger voters. But who exactly is he? What's his MO? Here are the details. Jordan Bardella, the far-right candidate to be France's prime minister, has pledged to fight a cultural battle against Islamism and secure an EU budget rebate, even as he promised a lot of pragmatism on the economy if his party wins snap elections. This 28-year-old chief of the National Rally Party says he is confident of winning an outright majority in legislative elections, which would force President Emmanuel Macron into a power-sharing government with a potentially antagonistic counterpart. National Rally, the far-right party led by Marine Le Pen, and Jordan Bardella has surged to first place in the first round of legislative elections, according to a projection produced by Ipsos after polls closed. Bardella, who is Le Pen's most trusted lieutenant, argues the RN is ready to govern. In fact, he has been scaling back the party's big spending economic program in a bid to reassure jittery markets and corporate bosses. Some of the RN's economic proposals remain unfunded and scant on detail, such as cutting income tax for those under 30 to combat brain drain, and the repeal in principle of Macron's retirement age increase from 62 to 64. The RN intends to move ahead with a proposed law that states as its aim to combat Islamist ideologies, and this includes measures to make it easier to close mosques and deport imams deemed to be radicalized, along with a ban on various types of veils. But Bardella said his first move if the RN takes power would be to boost working class people's purchasing power by cutting value-added tax on energy and petrol, which he says would cost 12 billion euros a year. While analysts have questioned the feasibility of the revenue-raising moves, it is crucial to note that the far-right program could contravene EU rules on several fronts. This includes lowering VAT, withdrawing from the EU's electricity market, and giving preferential treatment to French companies in public procurement. Well, French voters have yet to decide if they want to give Bardella a mandate to carry out such policies. Parmeshwar Bava for NDTV. Meanwhile, a week ago, Apple became the first company to face preliminary charges under the EU's new big tech antitrust law, the Digital Markets Act. Now again, as predicted, it's Meta's turn. Though they involve the same law, the two cases are in many ways very different. Apple stands accused primarily of making it difficult and overly expensive for app developers to steer their iOS users to cheaper deals off the platform, where Apple doesn't get to take its lucrative revenue cut. Meta, however, is in trouble for charging a hefty monthly fee to Facebook and Instagram users who will not consent to being surveilled across Meta and third-party services for ad targeting purposes. One case is about restricting developers, the other about railroading users. However, both take aim at the core business models.
So what the DMA requires the gatekeepers to do is to ask the users whether they consent or not to this combining of personal data. If they consent, they will be offered a personalized ad service, but if they do not consent, they would need to receive an equivalent but less personalized option of the service. So Meta had introduced a pay on or consent model, which indeed then covers the consent option, where the user would say yes, and they would get the fully personalized version. And then the second option that the user can go for is to pay and then not see any ads at their service.
Welcome back. The victorious Indian team's return home has been delayed as Hurricane Beryl forced cancellations of flights in Bridgetown in Barbados. Sources say that the team is expected to reach India now on Wednesday. Hurricane Beryl unleashed powerful winds over the eastern Caribbean, downing power lines and ripping roofs from buildings as scientists argue that climate change is likely adding to how quickly the unusually fierce early storm formed. For a quick update from Ground Zero, we have with us Jonto Kopin. Thanks so much, Jonto, for joining us. Tell us what's happening in Barbados after India's victory. The team is currently stuck there, we're well aware. What's the latest you can share with us at the moment?
So the hurricane came about midnight, 1 o'clock today in the morning, and there were like really high winds, lots of rain, lots of flooding, and there's been some property damage, but the Indian cricket team is safe and sound. They're all good. They're at the nicest hotel in Barbados, so they're fine. But obviously, because of the weather, the airport was closed yesterday about 7 p.m. and it will remain closed for the rest of today. They're hoping to open it tomorrow once there's no damage and it's safe to take off. So we should get an announcement tomorrow letting us know if the team can take off. Late morning, early afternoon, hopefully. But obviously, nothing will happen in the meantime until they're absolutely sure that the team can be safe.
Well, we are eagerly awaiting for them to return. But in terms of the insider details, could you tell our viewers how the team is spending time there? What is their plan of action?
I watched all the games that they played in Barbados against Afghanistan and then the final. They played fantastically well. From the position they were in the final with 30 off 30, to come back and win the game by 7 runs was amazing. And that just shows the strength of the team. So it was good to watch them. We had a packed house for the final. It was mostly Indian fans as well. People from all over the place, New York, India, of course, some Barbadians. We had some Guyanese fans that adopted India. It was it was almost like home support for them for the final. And it was good to see them interact with the fans after the game when they did the stadium tour. Not stadium tour, but they did the lap of honor. So that was cool. They would have. I'm sure they would have been traveling around Barbados after the final. They would have done their bits and pieces after the game because the game was finished quite early, so they would allow the rest of the day probably to do what they had to do. The only problem is the bad weather would have come soon afterwards, pretty much. So soon being like the next day, so they wouldn't have got to do too much today. And I wouldn't suppose they would do anything tomorrow, really, unless they fancy doing some shopping. Because we have the all clear. You are allowed now to be back on the roads and traveling and whatnot. There's still some high winds, but not as high as the 100 mile per hour plus winds. So you can be back out and about if you want to. So they might take this opportunity because they can't leave yet. So they might be going out and about, doing some stuff, seeing some people, but or checking out some sites. But I would imagine they will spend most of their time in the hotel room.
Well, Jean-Claude, thanks so much for joining us with that quick update from Ground Zero. Do stay safe. That's all from this edition of The World 24/7. We'll keep tracking the latest for you. Do stay tuned.